a look at where President Biden's Supreme Court nominee is on guns, and an interview with former NRA board member Rocky Marshall. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can pick up a membership today if you want exclusive access to dozens of well-reported stories and analysis pieces on firearms news throughout the country. It's something you will not find anywhere else, no matter how hard you look. And if you become a member, you'll also get early access to this podcast, as well as the opportunity to appear on the show, if you would like. It's one of my favorite segments that we do, the members interview. You learn a little bit more about the people who make the Reload possible, because we are an independent and completely reader-funded operation here. If you are a member and you get the Sunday newsletter, just reply to that and let me know, and we'll have you on. Love to do that. Anyway, this week, we're going to be talking about the situation at the NRA. There was big development, and we actually have a former NRA board member on, somebody who's been at the center of a lot of the fights internally and externally over there at the NRA. His name is Rocky Marshall. Rocky, welcome to the show. Can you tell people just a little bit more about yourself before we begin?
Yeah, sure, Stephen. Hey, so I'm a 40 years in the industry. I'm a business guy. I own a manufacturing company here in Texas for the last 20 years. I'm the founder, CEO. We make truck accessories and we distribute those throughout the United States and Canada. You can check us out. Frontier Truck Gear is the name of the company. And before that, I was 18 years. I was a division president for a Fortune 150 company. You can look my background up online and you can find out all that stuff there. I'm an avid hunter, shooter. We own a ranch here in Texas, and we actually have a gun range here that we shoot at with my boys and our family. And I got appointed to the NRA. I guess that was in January of 2021 when a board member had resigned, and I was appointed to replace that board member. And my term expired. I guess it was in September of 2021 is my last month there. So been on the NRA board. I've been on other boards. I've been, chief chairman of the board for other boards, large boards and small boards. So I have some experience working with board of directors, and that's my background.
Okay, wonderful. And just to give people a little bit of insight as far as where you stand in this whole internal debate over Wayne LaPierre, the CEO and executive vice president of the NRA, and some of these allegations of corruption against him and others. And there's this New York lawsuit that's has been seeking to shut down the organization. I just want to give a little bit of background about what's been going on. You joined the intervention attempt in the bankruptcy that the NRA tried to go through, looking to establish an independent court-appointed examiner to go through the finances of the group. And then also recently, after you weren't renominated to the board, which we can get into a little bit of that, the politics of that as well.
Right.
But you filed another intervention attempt in the New York case, where the Attorney General, Letitia James, who's a Democrat and a political opponent of the NRA, has been attempting to shut down the organization. Just so obviously you are a critic of the way the group has been run, and you, while you were on the board, you attempted to change some of the things that the group does. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a good assessment. Yes, that's correct.
And so the big development this week is that Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, her attempt to shut down the group, to dissolve it completely over these accusations of corruption and self-dealing and so forth, that was thrown out by a judge, by the New York judge. So that no longer a possibility that the NRA won't exist because of this case at the end of it. What is your reaction to that development?
Yeah, so I think, that was kind of a shock. I didn't expect to see that this soon in this case. I mean, the trial has not started. They're still gathering data and doing depositions and so forth. So that was a surprise to me. It's great news for the NRA and for the members of the NRA because it really removes that big threat that Letitia James and the New York AG had put out there that she wanted to dissolve the NRA. And so that the judge wisely, I think, just took that off the table. That's not an issue. The NRA is not going to be dissolved here. And I think that the focus now of this trial will be really on the wrongdoing. Anybody that was involved with some of the wrongdoing and the malfeasance, that is going to be dealt with in this trial. And those issues will come to light. But so I think it's great news for the NRA that issue has really been put away with.
Right. And so that's interesting, right? Because obviously the NRA leadership, William Brewer, the NRA's counsel, was also very happy about this outcome, naturally. And
Right.
so this also aligns with what your goals were. You didn't want to see the NRA shut down, right, and have its assets distributed by the New York Attorney General, who knows where she would have recommended that the NRA's money be sent. But what was the outcome that you want? Like, what are you trying to get to for the NRA?
So the reason I did the intervention on the New York AG case was at that point in time, no one was representing the members. The New York AG was trying to dissolve the NRA and basically destroy it. I felt like the Bill Brewer law firm really, they were trying to protect management. They were really representing management. They're not representing members in this issue. And so the purpose of the intervention from my part was to try to be a voice for members, to have someone in this case telling the judge that the NRA is important. It's important to the Second Amendment. It's important to free speech. It's important to all the 4.5 million members that are part of the NRA. It's an important issue for us, and I wanted to be that voice, and that was the reason I tried to intervene in the case.
Right. And ultimately, the judge decided not to let you intervene, partially because you're no longer on the board. You were on the board when you filed to intervene, but you're not on it anymore. Now,
Right.
can you explain to me and the audience just a little bit about the nomination process? Like, why aren't you on the board? Why weren't you even on the ballot for reelection?
Okay, so I was appointed to replace a board member in January, and so I served, I guess it was 9 or 10 months on the board. And I really became, I guess, a problem for the board of directors and also for the NRA management, because I was a pretty outspoken critic, as you well know. So I sent lots of correspondence to the entire board highlighting a lot of the problems that have shown up in the press that you see in news articles, but you also see it in the filing that the New York AG made. So that was not really popular with a lot of the board members. So the process is the nominating committee tightly controls who gets nominated to be included on the ballot that goes out in the National Rifleman magazine, and that's how you get elected. Well, so when my name, obviously it was a lot of members, requested I be included, but the nominating committee only picks those few that they want to include. And I was not selected by the nominating committee, which means my name would not be on the ballot, and it wasn't on the ballot to be reelected.
Right. And so I guess essentially what you're saying there is effectively the board gets to decide who is allowed to run for the board. There's a mechanism around this. I think Frank Tate is somebody who actually successfully got petitions, signatures to get on the ballot this year. Who's another critic of Wayne LaPierre and leadership and wants to see Wayne resign. But effectively, the vast majority of people who end up on the NRA ballot, they go through that nominating committee process. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, Frank, we need to research that. He may be the only person that I know of that ever was able to get on the ballot via petition, because you need so many petition signatures and they have to be life members. And I think it's in excess of 1,000 members that you have to get on petition. And Frank was able to pull all that together. And I hope that people listening to this podcast will vote for Frank and vote for Frank only on that ballot. But it's very difficult. If you're not nominated by the nominating committee, it's really hard to get on the ballot to be even considered by the membership to be voted for.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate the sort of complexity of internal NRA politics and how the group is actually run. For instance, if you're an NRA member, it doesn't necessarily mean you even get to vote in the election of most of the board members. You have to be a
Correct.
life member or consecutive 5-year member. And then that's really, it's not, there's 4.5 to 5 million members. A lot of them are not eligible to actually vote in these elections. Now they have a sort of solution to this kind of. There's 75 board members that get elected through the ballot system.
Correct.
And then there's a 76th board member that gets elected at the annual meetings. Although I think because COVID's obviously messed up with a lot of things, they've had to cancel the last 2 annual meetings. I don't think they've been doing that election.
Right.
But anyway, that's supposed to let the rest of the NRA membership give them some sort of form of voting for at least one of the 76 board members, right? Am I explaining that correctly?
Well, no, actually, it's still being controlled by the nominating committee, because that 76 board member, you would have had to have been on the ballot. So if, let's say you were not chosen by the ballot process, and you just weren't chosen for some reason, only those people that were on the ballot that were not chosen are eligible to be the 76th director. So, for example, you just couldn't randomly vote for someone else that you wanted to include on the board. It had to be someone that was on the board, on that ballot originally.
Mm. And also, not every board member is up every year, right? They serve usually three-year terms. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's usually a third. So I think it's a third of the total board that is up for re-election.
So really, and then let's say it's a scenario, right? There's a lot of critics who want to remove Wayne LaPierre from leadership at the NRA, right? This is a common thing here. People don't like the allegations that he spent NRA money on, fancy suits, although I guess Ackerman McQueen was sort of the pass-through for a lot of these things, the former top contractor, who they actually also just reached a settlement with, but we don't know the details of.
Right.
But, luxury trips, private jet flights, yacht trips, all this stuff that we've heard about, and that Wayne has actually admitted to some of this in the form of the 2019 990s. He admitted to $400,000 worth of excess benefits being paid to him, and that he, I guess, was meant to pay that back as almost sort of a interest-free loan, I guess would be the best way to describe that situation. Of the things that he's admitted to. The rest of it is disputed, of course. They claim, that he didn't do these things, or there were reasons that justified them as business expenses. But anyway, if you wanted to remove him, the practical process is to have 2/3 of the board vote to kick him out. Right.
Correct.
And so with the board as it stands now, the vast majority support Wayne LaPierre. The vast majority voted for him to be executive vice president for another term at the last board meeting in Charlotte, where you actually were nominated to run against him for the first time in, 30 years, right? That he's had a competitor.
That's correct.
But most people voted for Wayne. And so if you wanted to get him off the board, you'd have to probably remove 2/3 of the board through this ballot process, which is controlled by the board, right? As far as who gets to be on the ballot. And then that would take at least 2 years of voting people out, because only 1/3 of the board is up each year. So I just to give sort of an impression of how complex the internal workings actually are. And then you believe that you weren't renominated because you oppose Wayne's leadership.
Correct. Right? Yeah. That's a pretty common process. You can see other board members that were also not renominated, like Colonel Brown, for example. He's the editor of Soldier Fortune magazine. He was not renominated by the nominating committee and had been on the NRA board for decades. Because he was also outspoken about the management and some of the decisions that were made. So that's kind of a way they control the process. If you speak out, you're either going to be tossed off committees if you were on a committee, and you're not going to be renominated. And that's the way they control the process. And it's very unfortunate for the membership that's the process.
And so what is it? You said you're happy with this ruling that there won't be dissolution, right?
Correct.
What do you want to see the outcome be in this New York case then?
So I think, hopefully they're going to be moving towards trial. I'm thinking maybe later in the summer. But in order to restore the NRA, to have integrity in the NRA for the membership, the wrongdoers have to be dealt with. And so I think the New York AG, that's what they're going to spend their time on. So any of the management team or board members that were involved with, misusing NRA monies or involved with contracts that may not be quite appropriate, all that has to be dealt with. And hopefully the New York AG will actually work on behalf of the membership now and reclaim those monies that were donations by members and reclaim that for the benefit of the NRA. So really, I think the future of the NRA for the membership is really in the hands of the New York AG. Whether we want it to be or not, that's where we are. So I'm hoping that the judge is a good judge, it appears to me, and that the outcome is favorable as far as removing anyone that's done some of these things that have been discussed by the New York AG, and also it's in the filings. All that should be dealt with by the courts.
Interesting. And so you were on the board, right, for
Yes.
several months there. You're a vocal, outspoken critic of Wayne and other members of leadership. How many people on the board would you think would need to be removed for that goal that you're talking about?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I got to know a lot of the board members, and several would talk to me in private. They would call me or email me, but they would not speak publicly. And so just by that interaction, when I was there was less than a dozen of board members that I would consider very upset with what has happened and also did not support what had happened. But publicly in the board meetings, they would vote with the board. They would not speak out. They wouldn't comment in a negative way, in which I was commenting a lot about some of the things that were going on. So there was less than I'd say 12 board members. And now with this new board, I think there's even fewer. There's only, I would think, 5 or 6 that believe that management has made mistakes and need to be taken off the NRA. So there's not many. The vast majority, I would say 80% of the board supports what the NRA has done, and they're not willing to make the changes necessary to correct the problems.
And in your opinion, why do you think that is?
Well, there's lots of reasons, actually. I think some people, there's kind of the inner circle. The people that would talk about it, we called it the cabal. There's the cabal group that are very close to Wayne, and they really control the process. And they're the most outspoken supporters, and also they kind of control the board. So there's probably a third of the board is that cabal group that tightly control the outcome. There's also a third of the group that they don't necessarily agree with what's happened, and they can see the problems. They're just not willing to do anything about it because they know if you speak out, you're going to be removed from your committee and you're not going to be renominated. And so you'll no longer be able to serve on the NRA board. So I think, that they're being suppressed to just be quiet. And then there's probably a third of these board members that really are not qualified to be on a board. They don't understand the complexity of some of these issues. They don't understand financial matters. They don't understand tax fraud. They don't understand all these things. And they think that the New York AG is telling lies and that it's not true, which all the data supports. A lot of it is true, if not all of it. So that's how I see it. There's probably 3 different types of board members there, but the third, the cabal, controls the board. The other 2/3 go along with whatever that group is doing.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by control the board? How do they control the board? There's 76 members. How
Right.
does 1/3 of them control the rest?
Well, so if you look at the committee assignments, the same people are the chairmen or the vice chair of all the important committees. So anything that has to do with the money or the power of the board or the legislative portion of the board, if you look at that, it's all the same board members. They're generally officers in the board or they're former, officers of the board. So it's a small group, and they control the meetings. So I've tried to, in some board meetings, I tried to bring a resolution, for example, to expand the special litigation committee, which seemed to be a reasonable, request, because there's only 2 people on that committee. And they were making decisions for the entire board. Well, that was shot down by the entire board because they didn't want to do that. They don't want the board involved. They want it just be controlled by a very select few members that are highly supportive of Wayne and also the history of the NRA. So that's how they control. They control all the board meetings. They control the agenda. And it's very difficult to deviate from the agenda that's been presented because that's the process that they're managing.
And, I guess you're painting a very dire picture, of course, of what's going on at the NRA. Well, in fact, can you speak to that a little bit? If, for instance, nothing comes of this New York case, if the leadership wins, right, the Brewer law firm is able to convince the judge not to levy any sort of punishments against leadership, obviously they argue that there have been reforms made and that this group is self-corrected and there's no need for any further action from the government side of things. If that wins the day in court, what do you expect could happen to the NRA in your personal view?
Okay, so keep in mind my background. I'm a business guy, and so I spent a lot of 40 years reading financial statements and understanding how metrics work in businesses. And if you look at the metrics, the things that are important to the NRA, things like what's our total membership, what's the total donations, things like that. All of those numbers are declining at a pretty rapid rate. The NRA continually presents that we have 5 million members. That's not true. We don't have 5 million members. We at one point in time we did, but that membership base has declined quite significantly. I think it's around 4.6 million or so. The donations have dropped significantly. Upwards of 35%, 40%. So I think the members, are listening and they're reading a lot. If you read any of the articles out there, you read the documents on the reload that you put out and see so many pro-gun groups have really exposed the problems at the NRA. The membership is waking up to that. So if the New York AG, if this does not get resolved in the court, I believe the NRA is really headed for potential demise at some point in the future as members pull away and look elsewhere to try to get, Second Amendment, groups and get involved with the things we're trying to do with the NRA. So I think it looks very dire for the NRA, and I'm hopeful that the court can help the NRA get back on track by removing the wrongdoers, replacing those people with good people that can run the NRA and bring it forward. But the members are not going to continue to support the NRA if it's not corrected.
We did publish the 2021 August financial report to the board on the reload, and it did show there's a 50% drop in revenue. Membership is somewhere around 4.75 million at that point in time, and services had also been cut by about 50%, and legal fees had really skyrocketed to the tens of millions. It was $31 million through the first 8 months of 2021.
Right.
But speaking, I guess the other question here for you as somebody who's tried to reform things internally at the NRA, given the stakes involved that you just laid out, why haven't we seen a more effective reform effort come into being with the NRA? The NRA is a very important institution in the gun rights movement, as you mentioned earlier. It's in your view, obviously, and I'm sure the view of a lot of other people, it's going in the wrong direction. The numbers look bad. They're caught up in this corruption prosecution. Why haven't there been the kind of forceful grassroots effort to reform the group, you think?
Well, I think part of it is the COVID, we'll call it the COVID years, have had a really detrimental effect on the NRA members meetings, for example. Last year in 2021, as you remember, the NRA member meeting was canceled. It was scheduled to be in Houston, and because the COVID numbers were running pretty high, they canceled it and then had a ad hoc members meeting in Virginia. And so the members weren't there. I mean, I know you came to that meeting, but there were
in Charlotte, yeah.
Yeah, in Charlotte.
Right.
I actually was in Charlotte. There was 150 people there. I mean, there was no one there. And so the members haven't had an opportunity to really come together and voice concerns about the direction that the NRA has been on the last several years. So maybe at the next members meeting, which is coming up, I think in May in Houston, that maybe the members will be outspoken and have an opportunity to address some of these issues, hopefully. And I'd hoped that was going to happen last year, and it just didn't happen. And right now, I'm really kind of focused on the courts and seeing if they can turn around. The problem with the courts, that could take years. I mean, that's not going to be resolved this year. Even if the NRA loses in court, I'm assuming that they would, appeal that decision. And so that process could continue on for maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe longer. Yeah. So if the members are listening to this podcast, I would suggest you come to the Houston meeting in May and speak your mind. If you have a concern about some things that have happened, this be a great time to get involved and to speak what's on your heart about your NRA. This doesn't belong to Wayne. It doesn't belong to the officers. It belongs to you, the members.
Yeah. But speaking of the NRA, obviously leadership has been vocal in denying these allegations. In saying that there were issues, but they've been fixed. This is what you hear commonly from Brewer and other representatives of the NRA, that there had been some issues, but they were fixed, and that they were suing Ackerman McQueen, the former contractor. They blamed a lot of the issues on them. They blamed issues on the former treasurer, Woody Phillips, former chief of staff. They blamed a number of people. They say, but we've fixed it now. We've put in place more safeguards internally. Do you believe any of that? Obviously it seems like you're very skeptical of all of those arguments. Is that?
Well, yeah. So when I first got on the board, I believed what was being presented by the NRA. At that point in time, so this is January 2021, the NRA was basically saying that the New York AG is attacking the NRA, and all of those accusations are untrue. So I believe that. So I spent several months researching every one of those accusations. I was able to pull together all the former minutes to all the meetings, all the tax documents. I was able to get that from the NRA, and every accusation that I found in the New York AG case. When I researched the documents, I found them to be true. I couldn't find one that wasn't true. I just feel like that. I don't know what is going to happen to the board if they don't get involved in trying to change this process. But at this point in time, I just don't believe that they will.
So you don't think they have at all to this point?
No. Well, even so, for example, like the bankruptcy filing. At the first board meeting that I attended, they had already voted to file bankruptcy, and they were trying to get the board to retroactively approve it, which is really odd because it had already been approved by the Special Litigation Committee. And so what they did is it wasn't even on the agenda. They passed out the resolution about 5 minutes before the vote, and it was completely inconsistent with the bylaws. So what they were trying to do by filing a bankruptcy filing in Texas is against the bylaws, because the board has to decide all that. Anything with change of charter, anything like that, that's in the bylaws. You have to follow that. They completely skirted those issues, and they got the board to vote, which the board approved the bankruptcy filing. Well, you can't do that. I was the only board member who voted no, because you can't violate the bylaws. They knew they were violating the bylaws. They didn't care, and they voted to do that anyway. And that was even called out in the bankruptcy case in Dallas. The judge made a note of that the board was bypassed on the bankruptcy filing. Well, that's all recent. That wasn't 2 years ago. This has all happened in last year in 2021. So there are still things that are happening at the board level, maybe not to the same degree as in 2016, 17, 18, and 19, but they're still violating the bylaws, and the board is not operating independently as an oversight, as a fiduciary oversight of the NRA. They're just not operating that way.
Now, the NRA lawyers in the intervention attempt in the New York case, they put forth a theory that part of the reason that you're doing this, or that you tried to intervene, is because you were nominated to be executive vice president against Wayne,
right?
And that you have plans to effectively try and take over the organization yourself through some of these legal maneuverings. How do you respond to what they've argued?
Yeah, that's really pretty funny. So I was nominated, and really I didn't believe we had any chance of me being elected as EVP. We wanted to put someone out there so that the board members had a choice, because Wayne had not been opposed in this election process for, I guess, as long as he's been the EVP, which I think is over 20 years. So I think I got a couple of votes, but that was really more of a protest vote. It had really no chance of winning. I don't want to take over the NRA. I'm just trying to be a voice for the members, and that's the reason I got involved in the intervention. But I was hopeful too that I could convince the board we need to make a change, but that just couldn't happen. The board was not willing to make those changes. But if someone else wants to take over the NRA and run it and manage it correctly, I'll be the first person supporting them, because we need to make some changes. The officers need to go. Wayne needs to go. Some of the executives need to be removed as well. Changes need to happen. And if the members will get engaged, maybe that will make that happen. If not, hopefully the courts will fix this over time.
So you've mentioned there that there's still issues ongoing with the way the NRA is run, even during your time on the board, after many of the main allegations from this case had taken place. They've also had issues with retaining directors and officers insurance, which provides liability coverage for people who are on boards like the NRA board and make decisions for how the group can be run or should be run, because they have a fiduciary responsibility, which means they could be sued personally over how some of these decisions play out. And that's what D&O insurance is meant to protect against, and just in case there is a lawsuit like that. Given, at least in your view, that they're still making a lot of decisions that are not correct or could be questioned in court at a later time, how has the board reacted to the loss of their D&O insurance? What kind of risks do you believe, as somebody who was on the board, are associated with serving on this board today or in the last couple of years? And how's the rest of the board view those risks?
Okay, it's unfortunate that I don't think that the board members fully understand their role as a fiduciary, and they don't understand what D&O insurance really is and why it's so important. The board has been kind of quiet about the whole issue. The insurance carrier, which was Lloyd's of London, was the D&O insurance provider for the NRA. They dropped the NRA because the risk was too high. So they just dropped the NRA as a customer. The NRA went out, and initially they said they were going to do a kind of a self-insurance. They were going to set aside monies that could be used for possible D&O coverage. Well, I don't think that ever came to any type of fruition. Then they went out and pieced together several insurance carriers to get a very expensive D&O policy. There's several problems with that. The first one is the D&O policy has still not been provided to the board. I requested that from the the NRA, and they refused to give it to me. I even got an attorney involved to try to force them to give me a copy as a director. And so I could see that. They wouldn't provide it.
What did they say for why they wouldn't provide
Well,
it?
they said it's confidential. They said it was confidential information. And I said, I'm a director. You can't keep the policy that's supposed to cover me confidential for me, And so they just said, well, we're not going to release that. And I actually did see it recently. I think the Russian hackers posted it on a website that I read, and I was able to finally read it for the very first time. But the problem with the policy. It only starts this year. Anything that has occurred prior to this policy is not covered. So if there was any kind of fiduciary failing by the board prior to this policy starting, there is no coverage. And I don't think they understand that. And if I was serving on the board in those difficult years, prior to 2020, I think there's some financial exposure there that they could be at risk. And I don't think they appreciate that.
Right. And so I guess, what do you view as the exposure? I guess, take, for instance, the bankruptcy filing that cost the organization tens of millions of dollars to do. It was unsuccessful. It was widely viewed to be a Hail Mary move that didn't have much chance of success. Could the board members be sued personally if, for instance, current leadership is no longer in charge of the NRA? Because wouldn't the NRA have to sue? They'd be the party that was, affected by these poor decisions, right? So I guess, can you explain a little bit of how you view these board members being personally liable, and maybe use the bankruptcy as an example?
Yeah. So let's assume that the courts find that the management, these accusations are all true. Well, at that point, the New York AG can try to claw back all of the monies that were spent in let's say a fraudulent manner, or spent in a way that was inappropriate or illegal. So the New York AG can try to claw back those monies. Also, individual lawsuits can be filed against board of director members and make them personally liable for those funds, because the board is the oversight. That's why the board is so important. It's the governing body to make sure that your management and the board is operating within the law. If you violate that, and you knowingly violate those responsibilities or ignore your responsibilities as a fiduciary, and claiming ignorance is not a valid claim. You can't claim I didn't know, or the whole position of being on the board of directors is you either know or you should have known. There is no, well, I didn't know, therefore I'm not liable. No, you're liable. When you accept to be on this board, you are liable. That's why you need D&O insurance to protect you. Since they don't have D&O insurance policies, then the board members could be sued individually for whatever claims that may be out there for the misuse of the monies.
And I guess in your mind, something like the bankruptcy, where effectively that was decided without any input from the board members, but the board members later went back and retroactively approved it. And then even, I think, was it probably a third of the board didn't even show up to that meeting or vote on the resolution. Correct. Those people have perhaps significant exposure for that decision. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think, well, it's for not only that decision, but really for lots of decisions. So, I mean, even if you go way back, I mean, a lot of the board members that are still there approved a lot of the transactions that occurred that are now showing up in this lawsuit. So, things like contracts for, individuals, contracts for board members, contracts for officers and family members of officers, all that has some of that processed through the boards, especially through the committees, like the audit committee. There's some personal liability there. And it'd be interesting to see what happens moving forward, because I'm hoping that those monies that were misspent or misused, that the NRA has an opportunity to get those back. And the board of directors may have some liability there for sure.
Interesting. All right. So you're no longer on the board, and
correct.
The intervention that you attempted in New York has failed. So what do you view as your role moving forward in this effort to reform the NRA?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to get involved with the members and try to be a voice to just kind of continue to point out the problems that exist with the NRA, and hopefully, if the members will rise up and take back their NRA, maybe there's an opportunity that we can solve some of these problems. So I'm going to try to be a voice in that regard, and hope that we can change it going forward.
Okay, and of course, we're always open to having other NRA board members with a different point of view, or members of NRA leadership from, Wayne LaPierre on down onto the show to have the same discussion with them. Of course, we would love that. It's an open invitation to anyone who's interested. But we really appreciate you making some time for us and giving us a rundown of your experience on the board and your point of view on all this as well. Hopefully we can have you back on again, perhaps in the near future when we have some more, developments in this New York case or things that are going on with the NRA, because you obviously have some real world experience on the inside of the organization's board. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Rocky.
Stephen, glad to be here, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have in the future. Just give me a shout.
Wonderful.
All right, it's time for the weekly news update. We got a couple big stories surrounding the Supreme Court. Joe Biden just announced his preferred nominee to replace Justice Breyer's seat. And Steve, you wrote a couple of pieces about what that might look like in terms of the ramifications for guns. Yeah,
this is big news, right? I mean, there's been a lot of news lately. We just had one of the former NRA board members on to talk about the big news in that case. And now the president has made a selection to fill what's going to be an open vacancy on the Supreme Court, which is a lifetime appointment, right? It's big implications for not just gun law, but all law
Sure.
in the whole country, right, Jake? And so he made the announcement earlier this week. He's picking Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is currently on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. She actually just got appointed there last year. So
right.
It's a pretty quick upward movement for her at this point. Yeah, she had been on the D.C. Circuit Court for a number of years before that. So she's had a lot of experience on the actual court, but pretty fast move. Once Merrick Garland became Attorney General, she replaced him on the appeals court. And now that Justice Stephen Breyer is retiring, she's replacing him on the Supreme Court, or at least she's nominated to do so. And interesting thing about her, right, is her record, on guns, right? What do we know about her so far?
Well, it kind of involves a little bit of reading of the tea leaves because we don't have a ton of concrete info on guns. She hasn't really ruled on any big gun cases. Mm-hmm. But the sort of evidence we do have, she, at her hearing with the Senate Judiciary Committee to be confirmed for that DC Circuit spot, she was asked a few times about guns and the Heller precedent. I think as you put in the piece, it was pretty routine boilerplate type answers, very professional. She said she'd be bound by Supreme Court precedent. So nothing groundbreaking there. But some interesting things about, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just saying just some interesting things about her background. The fact that she was a career federal public defender for a long time has some possibly interesting implications for how she might view guns. We've seen several instances in the last year or so from public defender organizations becoming increasingly vocal about gun control policies and how they see that affecting the criminal justice system. So if she shares in that at all, there could be some interesting insight to have that voice on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, absolutely. She said in these written responses to, it was actually Senator Durbin specifically, who's a Democrat, which actually made some of the questions kind of fascinating, because one of them was like, how are you going to assure people that you're going to defend the Second Amendment? And this was a question from the Democrat on the Judiciary Committee chairman, and one of her answers is very telling on its face, at least. because she said specifically that she did affirm the individual right to keep and bear arms is protected by the Second Amendment, because that's what the precedent is under Heller. So she said this explicitly, which is interesting. But the gun groups all had significant reactions to this. You had the gun control groups all cheering the nomination, based basically exclusively off of what the fact that President Biden is the one who made it, right? And President Biden is very committed to gun control advocacy and wants to see a whole host of new gun bans and restrictions on ownership put into place. And so effectively they're saying, well, here's a quote from Chris Brown, who's the president of Brady. President Biden has chosen wisely. We need a justice on the court who understands that there is no daylight between the right to keep and bear arms and laws that protect Americans from the threat of gun violence, and a justice who understands that the effects of our laws fall on Americans differently. While we look forward to hearing from her and those who know her in confirmation hearings, it appears that Judge Brown Jackson is such a jurist. And, you know, Shannon Watts from Moms Demand Action effectively said that we look forward to, quote, supporting Judge Jackson's nomination and call the Senate to swiftly confirm her because President Biden made this choice. So,
right.
And then on the other side of things, you had the NRA, which basically took the opposite approach and opposes her being nominated. They said, quote, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson has never affirmed the Second Amendment protects the individual fundamental right of all Americans to keep and bear arms for the defense of themselves or others. Consequently, the NRA is concerned with President Biden's decision to nominate her to the Supreme Court of the United States at a crucial time when there are vital cases that will determine the scope and future of the Second Amendment and self-defense rights in our country. Interestingly, there kind of goes, at first it appears like it's at odds with what Jackson herself had said, because she said there was an individual right to keep and bear arms. But what the NRA means here, from my discussions with them, is in her quote, she's essentially saying she would uphold the precedent that the Supreme Court has already mandated. And that was in a confirmation hearing where she was going to be on the appeals court, which is subject to, you know, Supreme Court precedent. It can't just override Supreme Court precedent. Now she's going to be on the Supreme Court if she's confirmed, where you can set precedent. So they're basically saying they're not comforted by those previous comments. But there's one more thing, right, that she did that might be interesting or somewhat telling in this whole situation, right?
Yeah, just the fact that she was a public defender, I think, is fascinating enough. You saw this in the Firearm Policy Coalition's public statement on her nomination. Yeah. I thought they had a pretty interesting statement, whereas a little different than the NRA or the gun control groups, where they kind of inferred based on Biden's nomination what the outcome would be. FPC put out a statement. Judge Jackson, who served for a time as an assistant public defender, should have firsthand experience of just how evil and corrupt the criminal justice system is, using coercive plea bargaining to avoid constitutionally required jury trials and putting people in cages for nonviolent possessory offenses such as merely possessing common semi-automatic firearms or carrying a handgun without a license. And then they list the states like New York and California where they have may issue laws and they do prosecute people for carrying without a license. So it is kind of a fascinating look at how some gun groups are reacting based on that experience. Yeah,
you know, FPC seemed maybe more hopeful or reserved in judgment about how she might be on the court. And, you know, part of that reason is she was asked in that same series of questions about her time as a public defender and whether she was worried about the fact that she helped people, including, quote, you know, gun criminals. Durbin referred specifically to people who had committed gun crimes in this question. about getting them off as a public defender, and she was pretty forceful in her defense of public defenders and the role they play in the criminal justice system. She said, quote, "The primary concern of lawyers who work as public defenders is the same as that of the framers who crafted the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution, that in order to guarantee liberty and justice for all, the government has to provide due process to individuals it accuses of criminal behavior, including the rights to a grand jury indictment, a fair trial by a jury of one's peers, and competent legal counsel to hold the government accountable for providing a fair process and otherwise assist in the preparation of a defense against the charges. The Constitution guarantees that every person who is compelled to enter into the criminal justice system by virtue of being accused of a crime will receive representation in the context of their interactions with government authorities, and attorneys in the federal public defender's office perform this crucial function." So she is very defensive about her time there. She didn't give in at all to this line of questioning that says basically, you helped get criminals out of charges. Isn't that a bad thing? And she's saying no, which could play into that view, like you mentioned, of a lot of public defenders, that some of the nation's gun laws are enforced in ways that are inequitable or unjust. So we don't know, because she hasn't been a part of any of those groups who've spoken up on that point. But the other thing that I was going to mention is she also filed a brief for the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian-leaning think tank, before she was a public defender, before she was a judge. So she actually wrote a brief for a libertarian think tank. Now,
Right.
It was on the Fourth Amendment and it was on indefinite detention of terror suspects. Right. So not gun rights, obviously. And I don't know how much it tells us about gun rights, but the public defender aspect and the libertarian think tank history she has, that might give you some reason to think she's not necessarily going to side with the liberals in the court in gun cases all the time. At least some indication.
At least shows she's concerned and well aware of civil liberties concerns. Yeah. So, even if she doesn't 100% align with maybe the quote unquote pro-gun justices on the court, she might have a very different perspective just based on that background than some of the other justices. So it'll be definitely interesting to see if and when the hearings happen. I think they announced at the end of this month, they're going to start kicking off those hearings. Mm-hmm. And she'll almost certainly be asked about guns, considering there's a gun case currently before the Supreme Court. So, of course, we'll be covering what she says about that when that happens. And
definitely.
Should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if she doesn't end up kind of like the center-left version of Neil Gorsuch.
Possibly, yeah.
Perhaps I'm understating the rest of her judicial record and, some of the ways that she's ruled in non-gun cases that put her on the short list for a Biden nominee. But, Gorsuch has ruffled feathers of, Trump supporters, despite the fact that Trump put him on the court, by being a sort of more libertarian-leaning type of justice, but from the center right. Whereas, one can dream, I guess, if you're a gun rights activist, that maybe that's how Brown will turn out, but Brown Jackson. But I will say that it's, I have a members piece on this, looking through in more detail about, how is she likely to rule, and given these things. And I will say that it's probably fair to look at how the gun groups have reacted and think that that's probably indicative of how she'll actually rule. I mean, she's a Biden nominee. Yes, sure. A big part of her nomination was that Biden promised to nominate a Black woman to the court. So his priorities were maybe less focused on policy outcomes. But I don't know. When you have the entire gun control movement cheering the nomination and the gun rights movement jeering it, it's probably a good
There's probably
indication.
something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can't know, but that's the thing. When justices get on the court, it's a lifetime appointment. They're not answerable to the president who put them there or the Senate that confirmed them. So there's no guarantee she's going to be as favorable to the gun control arguments as the gun control groups believe she will be. But it's one of those things where we'll have to wait and see, but there are some reasons to think that maybe it won't turn out that way. I don't know.
And people should read that members piece to find out more about some of those reasons.
It's good. See, he's learning to pitch. He's getting better at the pitches at the end of these shows, right? And if they want to become a member, how can listeners do that?
Yeah, just go to the reload.com. We've got several tiers of membership to suit your needs. We have monthly memberships. We have yearly memberships that will get you 2 months free. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be extra generous, we have lifetime memberships. If you really want to support what we're doing here, we're entirely reader funded at this point. So we definitely rely on you guys to help keep this going, to help provide sober, serious firearms reporting and analysis. And if you do decide to become a member, we're grateful. And you get a bunch of goodies like members pieces like the one Steve just wrote about Judge Brown Jackson. You'll also get this podcast a day early, and you will get a special weekend Sunday newsletter. So I definitely encourage you to check out those membership options and help us out.
Yes, the members make this all possible. So we are forever grateful, and we hope to have more of you soon. So anyway, that's it for this week. We'll see you guys again next week.